Hey everybody, it's Alex at Motoroso.com, your dedicated mods marketplace, and today we're in the studio to continue talking about the development of our C8 Corvette project build, and today is going to be all about brakes. If you've watched the last two videos that we've put out, we went to a couple of track days, both at Buttonwillow and at Laguna Seca, and the brakes were what were failing. We were having a great time developing the suspension. This is the KW Club Sport suspension. Check out our development videos about that. That suspension has been incredible. I dropped like 10 seconds off of my lap times, but the brakes were holding me back. In fact, at the end of the day at Buttonwillow, it started to shake a little bit in the 103-degree heat, and almost all day at Laguna Seca, I was dealing with steering wheel shake, those rotors getting more and more warped, and the fade was so bad. I was having to hit the brakes 50% earlier than I was in earlier sessions, so they really got torched. Now, it's not surprising because these OEM brake pads, they're made for performance street driving. They're not meant to be put in those kind of race conditions where you're actually really pushing it, but as a result, it did shred the rotors. They are warped, and that you can see on the surface that they're not looking very, very good. So we're going to be continuing development of more and more advanced KW suspension products. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to check that out. But in this video, we're going to get the rotors off. We're going to try and get them machined to within spec, and then we're going to be installing brake pads from G-Loc, and we're going to talk a little bit about the technology in those G-Loc brake pads. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for all the upcoming development that we're doing with the C8 Corvette products. And of course, when you're shopping for your products, we are a KW Factory Elite dealer, we're a G-Loc dealer, and we sell over 1 million other top name brand products at Motoroso.com, where you can reach us on live chat, or you can call us toll free at 833-MOTOROSO. Let's go. Okay, so we got the wheel off and we're ready to take the caliper off and then the rotor. And there's a couple things to know. First of all, the bolts on the caliper, they are a 21 millimeter and they're big, and you're gonna need a big breaker bar as you can get in there, or if you can cram an impact driver in, that'll be helpful. There's only 2 of those bolts that go into the back. On the caliper, you have a couple of Torx bolts, but you also have a special, very unique tool that you need for the retaining pin on the pads, and it's not a common tool you're going to have. We had to go out and get it, and what it is a 9 millimeter 10 spline. So it's very rare, apparently heavily used on Volvos. How it ended up on a Corvette, we don't really know, but that pin retains the pads in there, so you're going to need that to get them out. Now the caliper is designed in a way that you can change the pads, it looks like, without actually having to take the caliper off, but we need to take the whole caliper off because we're getting the rotor off. And you can see hopefully in the video from here, and we'll get some close-up shots, but the pads have actually scored the rotor in a number of places, and when you run your finger across it, it's wavy and it's cavitated. It's not good, and I'm really hoping that we can get these rotors machined back into spec and then pair them with the G-Loc brake pad so that they can actually hold up to the heat. Let's go ahead and get these calipers and rotors off. Okay, so got the brake pads out. Now looking at them on the surface, you can't really tell that they were too terribly worn like the rotor. You can see the problems in the rotor. But look at the thickness of these pads. I mean, this car has 3,700 miles on it. These pads should be 5 to 6 times as thick, and they are basically in line with the noise sensor. So I roasted through these pads so quick. So if this is any evidence that you gotta upgrade your pads before you go to the track, I don't know what else you would need. So these things going straight in the trash. Now we can get the rotor off. Now the Torx we use to get the pins out from the caliper for the pads, that is a T40. There is a T30 retaining bolt on the rotor, should come right off. So as you can see, we've got the rotor off, and hopefully you get a little bit of a better look now, but there is a deep cut line, a couple of them all the way around. It's probably because the pad shed a little bit of material, it got stuck in there, and it cut a deep hole in the rotor. Now I'm really hoping that the machine shop can get this back within tolerance, because when you run your finger across it, it's deeply cavitated. It's a problem. They may not be able to get it within machine spec, but if they can, we can mate it to our G-Loc brake pads, get these out to the racetrack for at least one more session on the OEM rotors before we get our Brembo big brake kit installed. All right, so we got our rotors back from the machine shop. They had to have them for a couple days because they had to look up the specs for the 2020 C8, but they said there's plenty of material on these things. They got them straight. They weren't actually that far out, and there's even more material if we need to machine them again in the future, which we probably won't because we're gonna be upgrading to the Brembo Big Brake Kit with their new rotor and all of that. So make sure, obviously, you subscribe to the channel to see those future videos that come out. But now let's talk about the G-Loc brake pads that we're gonna be installing on the C8. And if that name is new to you, it's because it's a new name in the industry, but I love the name. G-Loc is actually from aviation. Jet fighters and aerobatic pilots, when the blood is running out of their brain, when they're pulling heavy Gs, like 5, 6 Gs, that causes cerebral hypoxia, which is the brain running out of oxygen, literally from the G-forces, and you pass out and you black out. And it's obviously a major issue in aviation. And car brakes, not producing those kind of G-forces, but if that's the inspiration that the engineers are using to try and get to that level, we are all about that. And that's probably why they've generated such a great reputation for a high quality product at a reasonable price, because these things work solidly and they really are a great application for anybody looking for street performance and racing applications right on up to the elite level. Now, this, being a new company, if that makes you a little bit nervous, right? You want something that's got a great reputation from a company that has a lot of experience, you should know the history of this company. Danny and Chris Puskar from G-Loc Brakes, they actually started a brake company back in 2000 with their father. Now, they had some problems running that business due to financing. Listen, I'm an entrepreneur, I relate to that. Running businesses is really hard, and sometimes if you get the wrong people involved, it can go sour, and that is exactly what happened. And they had to dissolve the company, and the brothers went to other brake companies where they then invested the resources and energy and experience that they had in those companies, but they also learned. Recognizing the importance of family and wanting to work together again, in 2015 they founded G-Loc Brakes, and this company was born, and since then they've been producing fantastic quality brake pads at a very reasonable price. And lastly, I'll mention they do one thing that I really appreciate. So they recognize that a lot of inexpensive manufacturers in the brake industry will use very toxic manufacturing processes, and those toxins can then be released when the brakes are being used through the brake dust, and that goes into our air and our water, and this can be very poisonous. And they've engineered processes to make these out of all organic material, and these brake pads are completely environmentally friendly. And listen, we're not exactly hugging trees over here, right? We're making cars go fast, we're having a lot of fun, we're going to the racetrack. But if you can do these things without polluting the air and the water that we drink, I deeply appreciate that, and I love that about G-Loc Brakes. And they're getting the same performance, and they don't cost that much more. So as I mentioned, G-Loc makes a number of different pads for the C8 Corvette. Now the first pads I want to mention are the GS1s. And these are intended to be a stock replacement. They're going to perform just the same way that the Z51 brake pads do. The difference is they're going to throw off 70% less brake dust than that OEM pad. And one of the biggest complaints from early C8 owners is that they do throw off a tremendous amount of dust, and it's really hard to clean off, and it's possibly also corrosive like other brake materials are. So if you're looking for a pad that throws off less dust but gives you that same street performance, consider that GS1, because for around $400 front and rear, you can throw off way less dust, it's environmentally friendly, and you're going to spend less time cleaning those wheels because it comes off way easier. And that's going to perform just like the Z51 brake pads, if that's good enough for you. Now for us, we are tracking this car as well. It needs to be able to drive to the racetrack and perform on the street, but we want it to be able to handle that higher temp racetrack application. So that's where you get into the R6, R8, R10, R12, R14, and R16 offerings from G-Loc. Now the higher you go up on that scale, the more intended those brake pads are for race applications. So you do not want an R16 in your C8 Corvette unless that is strictly a race car. So we're going with the R8 pad, which is what is sitting in front of me here now. This is going to be fine for the street. It's going to work in cold applications. It has good initial bite, but it'll handle those higher temperatures. It won't destroy the rotor by warping and throwing off too much material, and it's gonna perform at the level you want with much less fade than you would see from your stock brake pads. Now, is it gonna throw off less dust? No, these are gonna throw off just as much dust, but again, it is environmentally friendly and way easier to clean because it's non-corrosive. All right, so we're just about ready to get these things installed, and normally when you install new brake pads and rotors, you're gonna have to perform a bedding in procedure. And this is about heating the brakes up, getting the pads cured, so that then when they cool down again, they are now ready to perform the way that they were engineered and designed to. Luckily, G-Loc offers a feature where you can get these pads for 20 bucks extra per set. You can get them pre-bedded in. That means they're heat treated, at the factory. So when they arrive, all you have to do is throw them in, and then you can hit that brake pedal medium intensity 5 or 6 times, and that's gonna mate the surface of the pad to the rotor, but then you're ready to jump right in. I love this because, number one, at the racetrack, that can save you time, right? If you have to go bed in your brakes in your first session and give up your whole session to then letting the car cool down, you're losing expensive track time. And so this lets you just jump right back out on track. Additionally, if you're bedding in your brakes on the street, look, that's kind of hard sometimes to find the right place to do that. You're breaking speed laws, you're braking really aggressively, you could theoretically get in an accident or get arrested. So I love that you can just toss these in, and that's a great feature that G-Loc offers. So let's go get these things installed and subscribe to the channel because we're going to Laguna Seca next. All right, so putting everything back together is gonna go back together for the most part the way we took it apart. We're gonna do one thing differently. Obviously, first, I'm gonna wipe everything down, clean it up a little bit. Then we're gonna put the rotor back on. That's gonna be a Torx 30 retaining screw to kind of hold that in place. Then we're gonna actually put the caliper back on, and then we're gonna install the pads from the back the way they're designed to be hot swapped. Now, we didn't do that the first time around because the stock pads are glued to the pistons, and so they're very difficult to get out. Much easier if you just take the caliper off. So we're gonna put the caliper on. That's gonna take the big bolts in the back, and then as we put the pads back in, we're gonna have the Torx 40 screws that hold those in, and then the retaining spring clip, as well as that big pin that goes through with that weird 9mm 10 spline on the back. Very straightforward process. Then we're gonna go out and be ready to get those things just mated together with 5 to 6 touches of the brake pedal, and we'll be ready to go. All right, so we got everything all back together. As you can see, I also did the left side. During that process, you saw that we opened the brake fluid reservoir as well. Of course, when I'm pushing the pistons on the caliper back in, need that reservoir open so that the air can move up inside. And then the pads just slid right in. Everything went back together as expected. So essentially we are done, but because we did get the rear pads from G-Loc, we're gonna go ahead and install those too, and then we'll be ready to roll. All right, so here in the back, a little bit of a different strategy. It's not held in by any screws, it's just 2 pins that are held in by a spring clip. And so the key here is using a little punch and a small hammer, we're gonna knock those pins through and the spring clip will pop out, the brake pads will come out, new pads go in, spring clip goes back in, and we're set. All right, that's all there is to it. Rear pads are in, just gonna do the left side, then we'll put all the wheels back on, and then all the wheels need to be torqued down to 140 foot-pounds of torque, and we're ready to roll. All right, so we got our front and rear brake pads in. These are the G-Loc R8 pads, and next up, we're going to Laguna Seca. We're gonna report on how these brake pads hold up, see if we can drop our lap times, and then we'll see if the rotors can stand up to the punishment as well. Now, it's a good thing we did our front and rear pads. When we took those rear pads out, they were worn out like 60 to 70%. That weight of the motor over the rear must be helping these pads actually wear out more evenly, where usually you get a lot more wear in the front. So if you're doing brake pads in the front, make sure you do them in the rear at the exact same time. And of course, buy your G-Loc brake pads at Motoroso.com. You can reach us there on live chat or call us 1-833-MOTOROSO. Now we got a ton of other mods coming up as well. We're gonna be doing a Brembo big brake kit. So subscribe to the channel, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.